The Art of War, the Essential Translation by Sun-Tzu, continued. Disc 8.
Our men have no excess of worldly goods, and yet they do not disdain wealth. They do not expect to live long, and yet they do not disdain long life.
Wang Shi. They have what they need, and no more. If officers and men cared too much for worldly riches, they would cherish life at all costs. As it is, they fight to the death. If they had too much thought for self-preservation, they would have no will to fight. Zhang Yu. Wealth and long life are things that all men cherish, so if they burn or throw away valuable possessions and sacrifice their own lives, it is not that they dislike them, but simply that they see no choice in the matter.
On the day they are ordered into battle, they sit up and weep, wetting their clothes with their tears. They lie down and weep, wetting their cheeks.
Cao Cao. Because they are all resolved to die. Du Mu. They have all made a compact with death. Before the day of the battle, the order is issued. Today's affair depends upon this one act. If you do not put your lives at stake, your bodies will fertilize the fields and be carrion for the birds and beasts. Jiang Yu, Giles. Such is their emotion, as at the mournful parting at the river Yi between Jing Qi and his friends, when the former was sent to attempt the life of the king of Qin, afterward the first emperor, in 227 B.C. The tears of all flowed down like rain as he bade them farewell and uttered the following lines. The shrill blast is blowing, chilly the burn. Your champion is going, not to return. Giles. We may remember that the heroes of the Iliad were equally childlike in showing their emotion.
But throw them where there is no escape, and they will fight with the courage of the heroes Zhu and Gui.
Giles, Records of the Grand Historian. Zhuanzhu was a native of the state of Wu and a contemporary of Master Sun himself. He was employed by Gongxi Guang, later to become King He Liu, to assassinate his sovereign, Wang Liao, with a dagger that he secreted in the belly of a fish served up at a banquet. He succeeded in his attempt, but was himself immediately hacked to death by the king's bodyguard. This was in 515 B.C. The other hero referred to, Cao Guo, performed the exploit which has made his name famous 166 years earlier, in 681 B.C. The state of Liu had been thrice defeated by Qi, and was just about to conclude a treaty surrendering a large slice of territory, when Cao Guo suddenly seized Lord Huang, the Duke of Qi, as he stood on the altar steps and held a dagger against his chest. None of the Duke's retainers dared to move a muscle, and Cao Guo proceeded to demand full restitution, declaring that Liu was being unjustly treated because she was a smaller and weaker state. Lord Huan, in peril of his life, was obliged to consent, whereupon Cao Guo flung away his dagger and quietly resumed his place amid the terrified assemblage without having so much as changed color.
The skillful warrior deploys his troops like the Shuairan snake found on Mount Heng.
Mei Yao Chern, Swift Reactions and Responses. Jiang Yu. Shui means swift. Strike it, and it retaliates swiftly. This is a figure of battle formation. In the diagram of the 8 formations, we read, front is rear, rear is front. In every direction, each extremity is the head. Strike the belly, and head and tail both come to the rescue. Translator. The 8 formations, although not mentioned by Master Sun himself, make up the classic repertoire of battle formations. Their invention was attributed to various ancient figures, from the legendary Yellow Emperor to Zhu Liang, the sleeping dragon. According to the description in the Tai Bo Yin Jing, written by Li Chuan, the Tang commentator on the art of war, the formations were divided among the 8 trigrams. 4 fell under the yin category and 4 under the yang. Their names were heaven, earth, wind, clouds, flying dragon, winged tiger, soaring bird, curling snake.
Strike its head, and the tail lashes back. Strike its tail, and the head fights back. Strike its belly, and both head and tail will attack you. To the question, can an army be like the Shuairan snake?
Mei Yao Chern. In other words, is it possible to make the front and rear of an army react swiftly, Shuairan, to an attack on the other, as though they were parts of a single snake-like body?
I reply, yes, it can. Take the men of Wu and the men of Yue. They are enemies, but if they cross a river in the same boat and encounter a wind, they will help each other like right hand and left.
Mei Yao Chern. This is the underlying dynamic of the situation. Giles. The meaning is, if 2 enemies will help each other in a time of common peril, how much more should 2 parts of the same army, bound together as they are by every tie of interest and fellow feeling? Yet it is notorious that many a campaign has been ruined through lack of cooperation, especially in the case of allied armies.
It is not enough to tether horses and to bury chariot wheels.
Giles. These quaint devices to prevent one's army from running away recall the Athenian hero Sophanes, who carried an anchor with him at the Battle of Plataea, by means of which he fastened himself firmly to one spot. See Herodotus 9:74. It is not enough, says Master Sun, to render flight impossible by such mechanical means. You will not succeed unless your men have tenacity and unity of purpose, and above all, a spirit of sympathetic cooperation. This is the lesson which can be learned from the Shuairan. Translator. Brigadier General Griffith made a more modern comparison. Such Maginot Line expedients are not in themselves sufficient to prevent troops from fleeing.
There must be a single courage throughout. This is the way to manage an army. Strong and weak both can serve thanks to the principle of ground.
Mei Yao Chern. Both strong and weak can be used thanks to the underlying dynamic of the ground or terrain. Translator. Or, as Brigadier General Griffith puts it in his paraphrase of Zhang Yu, the difference in quality of troops can be balanced by careful sector assignment. Weak troops can hold strong ground, but might break if put in a position less strong. Other commentators take this to mean that one can make use of both strong or hard and weak or soft features of the terrain. According to this interpretation, hard is yang, soft is yin.
The skillful warrior directs his army as if it were a single man. He leaves it no choice but to obey.
Niu and Wang, 1990. The reason they are so united and so easy to command is that they find themselves in a situation or on a terrain where they have no option other than to fight.
It is the business of the general to be still and inscrutable, to be upright and impartial. He must be able to keep his own troops in ignorance, to deceive their eyes and their ears.
Cao Cao. The troops can share in the joy of completion, but not in the travail of conception. Zhang Yu. As the hermit of the Evening Star put it, in war, deception is to be prized, and it is not just the enemy that must be deceived, but one's own men, too. They must be enabled to follow, but not to understand. The Way and Its Power, Chapter 65. In the days of old, those who practiced Tao with success did not thereby enlighten the people, but on the contrary, sought to make them ignorant. Translator. Giles quotes Colonel Henderson. The infinite pains with which Stonewall Jackson, American Confederate General, 1824-63, sought to conceal, even from his most trusted field officers, his movements, his intentions, and his thoughts, a commander less thorough would have pronounced useless. Giles, History of the Later Han. In the year AD 88, Ban Chao took to the field with 25,000 men from Kutan and other Central Asian states with the object of crushing Yarkand. His victory in this campaign was due to the fact that he not only kept his own officers in ignorance of his real plans, but actually took the bold step of dividing his army in order to deceive the enemy.
He changes his ways and alters his plans to keep the enemy in ignorance. He shifts camp and takes roundabout routes to keep the enemy in the dark. He leads his men into battle like a man climbing a height and kicking away the ladder. He leads them deep into the territory of the feudal lords and releases the trigger.
Zhang Yu. Kicking away the ladder makes advance possible and retreat impossible. Releasing the trigger means one can go forward and not backward. This is what Xiang Yu did when he sank his ships after crossing the river.
He burns his boats. He breaks his pots. He is like a shepherd driving his sheep this way and that. No one knows where he is going.
Du Mu. The men are aware of their orders to advance and retreat, but they know nothing of the goal of the offensive. Translator. He keeps them in the dark so that he can exploit to the full the potential of the situation. Julienne, page 177. This same idea was applied in the political domain where it formed part of the classical tradition of despotism, misnamed legalism, of which 20th century Chinese totalitarianism is the direct heir. Citizens were to be treated like so many automata.
He assembles his troops and throws them into danger. This is the business of the commander.
Giles. Master Sun means that after mobilization there should be no delay in aiming a blow at the enemy's heart. Compare with his earlier statement in this chapter. Throw your men where there is no escape, and they will die rather than flee. Note how he returns again and again to this point. Among the warring states of ancient China, desertion was no doubt a much more present fear and serious evil than it is in the armies of today.
These things must be studied, the variations of the 9 kinds of ground.
Zhang Yu. One must not be hidebound in interpreting the rules for the 9 kinds of ground and how to respond to them. Giles. The saying, retreat in order to advance, almost exactly corresponds to the French, il faut reculer pour mieux sauter.
The advantages of flexible maneuver, the principles of human nature.
Cao Cao. It is, for example, human nature to advance toward gain and to retreat from harm.
The way of invasion is this. Deep penetration brings cohesion, shallow penetration brings scattering.
Translator. If these recurring references to deep penetration are beginning to sound like one of the Taoist or pseudo-Taoist sex handbooks, we should not be surprised. The 2 genres, art of war, art of love, share a lot of vocabulary and ideas. See the introduction for a brief discussion of this. Robert Van Gulik, Erotic Color Prints of the Ming Period, page 113, gives a telling example from the Ji Zhenjing, the true classic of the Complete Union, a late Ming sex handbook. The penultimate paragraph of the main text describing the climax of the sexual battle reads, I am in no hurry, but the enemy, the female partner, is hard-pressed for time, one is almost tempted to translate at bay, and throws his entire force into the battle. The arms clash as I advance and withdraw at will, using the enemy's food and exhausting his supplies. Then I practice the tactics of the turtle, the dragon, the serpent, and the tiger. The enemy surrenders his arms, and I gather the fruits of victory. This is called GG, after completion, the name of the penultimate hexagram in the Book of Changes. Ensuring peace for one generation. I withdraw from the battlefield and dismiss my soldiers. I rest quietly to regain my strength. I convey the booty to the storeroom, thereby increasing my power to the height of strength. The commentary explains, throws his entire force into the battle, as meaning that the woman's passion reaches its apex. After completion, that is, after orgasm, I continue pushing my member in and out, alternating deep and shallow strokes according to the prescribed method. The commentator continues, using the enemy's food means sucking her tongue. Exhausting his supplies means pressing her breasts. Then the woman sheds her true essence completely, and I have obtained the true yang. Withdrawing from the battlefield means descending from the horse.
When you leave your own territory and lead your men across the border, you enter dire terrain.
Mei Yao Chern. This is somewhere between light and scattering ground, less far forward than light, but farther than scattering. Wang Shi, Giles. This is terrain separated from home by a third state, whose territory we have had to cross in order to reach it. We must complete our business there quickly.
When there are lines of communication on all four sides, you are on crossroad terrain. When you penetrate deeply, you are on heavy terrain. When you penetrate superficially, you are on light terrain. When there are strongholds to your rear and narrow passes in front, you are on enclosed terrain. When there is no way out, you are on death terrain.
Jiang Yu. There is nowhere to escape to, on the left or right, in front or behind.
On scattering ground, we unite the will of our men.
Du Mu. Remain on the defensive, and their will is united. Engage battle, and they scatter easily.
On light ground, we keep them connected.
Du Mu, Giles. First, to guard against the desertion of our own troops, and second, against a sudden attack by the enemy.
On strategic ground, we bring up our rear.
Jiang Yu, Giles. We must quickly bring up our rear so that head and tail may both reach the goal. Giles, that is, they must not be allowed to straggle a long way apart.
On open ground, we see to our defenses.
Wang Shi, Giles. Fearing a surprise attack.
On crossroad ground, we strengthen our alliances. On heavy ground, we ensure continuity of supplies.
Giles. The commentators take this as referring to forage and plunder, not, as one might expect, to an unbroken communication with home base.
On intractable ground, we keep on the move.
Cao Cao. Move along swiftly.
On enclosed ground, we block the passes.
Meng, Giles. To make it seem that we are defending the position, when in fact we are planning to burst suddenly through enemy lines. Mei Yao Chern. We close off escape routes in order to make our soldiers fight with the fierceness of desperation. Wang Shi. We are afraid that our men will be tempted to run away. Du Mu, Giles. History of the Northern Qi Dynasty. In AD 532, Guo Huan, afterward emperor of the Northern Qi Dynasty, was surrounded by a great army under Erju Zhao and others. His own force was comparatively small, consisting only of 2,000 horse and something under 30,000 foot. There were gaps in the lines of the surrounding army, but Guo Huan, instead of trying to escape, actually blocked all the gaps with oxen and donkeys tied together. As a result, his men fought with the courage of despair and carried the day.
On death ground, we demonstrate the desperateness of the situation.
Du yo. Burn your baggage, throw away your provisions, fill your wells, level your stoves, and make it plain to your men that they cannot survive but must fight to the death. Mei Yao Chern. Survival arises from looking death in the face.
It is in the soldier's nature that when surrounded, he resists. When all seems lost, he struggles on. When in danger, he obeys orders.
Jiang Yu, Giles, History of the Later Han. In a perilous position, he obeys every order. Ban Chao, A.D. 31-101, his brother, the historian Ban Gu, wrote the history of the former Han, arrived at Shanshan, a non-Chinese Central Asian kingdom, an oasis state situated between Dunhuang and Kutan, in A.D. 73. Guang, the king of the country, received him at first with great politeness and respect, but shortly afterward his behavior underwent a sudden change, and he became remiss and negligent. Ban Chao spoke about this to the officers of his suite. Have you noticed that Guang's polite intentions are on the wane? This must signify that envoys have come from the northern barbarians, and that consequently he is in a state of indecision, not knowing with which side to throw in his lot. That surely is the reason. The truly wise man, we are told, can perceive things before they have come to pass. How much more, then, can he perceive those that are already manifest? Thereupon he called one of the natives who had been assigned to his service and set a trap for him, saying, "Where are those envoys from the Xiongnu who arrived some days ago?" The man was so taken aback with surprise and fear that he presently blurted out the whole truth. Ban Chao, keeping his informant carefully under lock and key, then summoned a gathering of his officers, 36 in all, and began drinking with them. When the wine had gone to their heads a little, he tried to rouse their spirits still further by addressing them thus: "Gentlemen, here we are in the heart of an isolated region, anxious to receive riches and honor by some great exploit. Now it happens that an ambassador from the Xiongnu arrived in this kingdom only a few days ago, and the result is that the respectful courtesy extended toward us by our royal host has disappeared. Should this envoy prevail upon him to seize our party and hand us over to the Xiongnu, our bones will become food for the wolves of the desert. What are we to do?" With one accord the officers replied, "Standing as we do in peril of our lives, we will follow our commander to the death." For the sequel of this adventure, see the beginning of chapter 12.
Without knowing the plans of the feudal lords, you cannot form alliances. Without knowing the lie of hills and woods, of cliffs and crags, of marshes and fens, you cannot march. Without using local guides, you cannot exploit the lie of the land.
Giles. With regard to local guides, Master Sun might have added that there is always the risk of going wrong, either through their treachery or some misunderstanding, such as Livy records, 22:13. Hannibal, we are told, ordered a guide to lead him into the neighborhood of Casinum, where there was an important pass to be occupied. But his Carthaginian accent, unsuited to the pronunciation of Latin names, caused the guide to understand Casilinum instead of Casinum, and turning from his proper route, he took the army in that direction, the mistake not being discovered until they had almost arrived.
Ignorance of any one of these points
Cao Cao, the advantages and disadvantages attendant on the 9 kinds of ground.
is not characteristic of the army of a great king.
Giles. Ba Weng, one who rules by force, or hegemon, was a term specially used for those princes who established their hegemony over other feudal states during the spring and autumn period. The famous 5 great kings of the 7th century were Duke Huan of Qi, Duke Wen of Jin, Duke Xiang of Sung, Prince Zhuang of Chu, and Duke Mu of Qin.
When the army of a great king attacks a powerful state, He does not allow the enemy to concentrate his forces. He overawes the enemy and undermines his alliances. He does not strive to ally himself with all the other states. He does not foster their power. He pursues his own secret designs, overawing his enemies.
Li Chuan, Giles. He can afford to reject entangling alliances and simply pursue his own secret designs, his prestige enabling him to dispense with external friendships.
Thus, he can capture the enemy's cities and destroy the enemy's state.
Giles. This paragraph, though written many years before the Qin state became a serious menace, is not a bad summary of the policy by which the famous 6 chancellors gradually paved the way for the final triumph under Shi Huangdi, the first emperor of Qin, who died in 210 BC.
Distribute rewards without undue respect for rules. Publish orders without undue regard for precedent.
Wang Shi, Giles. In order to prevent treachery. Sun-Tzu, Giles. The Marshal's Treatise says, "Give instructions only on sighting the enemy. Give rewards only for deserving deeds. Your final instructions should not correspond with those previously posted up." Jiang Yu. Your arrangements should not be divulged beforehand. Jia Lin. Your rules and arrangements should not be fixed. Translator. As Brigadier General Griffith summarizes, observing that the verse is obviously out of place, the general in the field need not follow prescribed procedures or customary law in respect to administration of his army.
Deal with a whole army as if it were a single man. Apply them to their task without words of explanation.
Giles. Lord Mansfield once told a junior colleague to give no reasons for his decisions, and the maxim is even more applicable to a general than to a judge.
Confront them with the advantage, but do not explain the danger. Throw them into perilous ground, and they will survive. Plunge them into death ground, and they will live.
He Yanxi, Giles, History of the Former Han. In 204 BC, the Han general Han Xin was sent against the army of Zhao and halted 10 miles from the mouth of the Jinxing Pass, where the enemy had mustered in full force. Here, at midnight, he detached a body of 2,000 light cavalry, every man of which was furnished with a red flag. Their instructions were to make their way through narrow defiles and keep a secret watch on the enemy. "When the men of Zhao see me in full flight," Han Xin said, "they will abandon their fortifications and give chase. This must be the sign for you to rush in, pluck down the Zhao standards, and set up the red banners of Han in their stead." Turning then to his other officers, he remarked, "Our adversary holds a strong position and is not likely to come out and attack us until he sees the banner and drums of the commander-in-chief, for fear I should turn back and escape through the mountains." So saying, he first of all sent out a division consisting of 10,000 men and ordered them to form in line of battle with their backs to the river Di. Seeing this maneuver, the whole army of Zhao broke into loud laughter. By this time it was broad daylight, and Han Xin, displaying the generalissimo's flag, marched out of the pass with drums beating and was immediately engaged by the enemy. A great battle followed, lasting for some time, until at length Han Xin and his colleague, Zhan Ni, leaving drums and banner on the field, fled to the division on the river bank, where another fierce battle was raging. The enemy rushed out to pursue them and to secure the trophies, thus denuding their ramparts of men. But the two generals succeeded in joining the other army, which was fighting with the utmost desperation. The time had now come for the 2,000 horsemen to play their part. As soon as they saw the men of Zhao following up their advantage, they galloped behind the deserted walls, tore up the enemy's flags, and replaced them with those of Han. When the Zhao army turned back from the pursuit, The sight of these red flags struck them with terror. Convinced that the Hans had got in and overpowered their king, they broke up in wild disorder, every effort of their leader to stay the panic being in vain. Then the Han army fell on them from both sides and completed the rout, killing a great number and capturing the rest, among whom was King Ya himself. After the battle, some of Han Xin's officers came to him and said, "In the art of war we are told to have a hill or tumulus on the right rear and a river or marsh on the left front." This appears to be a blend of Master Sun chapter 9 and the Grand Duke. "You, on the contrary, ordered us to draw up our troops with the river at our back. Under these conditions, how did we manage to gain the victory?" The general replied, "I fear you gentlemen have not studied the art of war with sufficient care. Is it not written there, 'Plunge your men into death ground, and they will live? Throw them into perilous ground, and they will survive?' Had I taken the usual course, I should never have been able to bring my colleagues around. What says the military classic? Swoop down on the marketplace and drive the men off to fight." This passage does not occur in the present text of Master Sun. "If I had not placed my troops in a position where they were obliged to fight for their lives, but had allowed each man to follow his own discretion, there would have been a general débandade, rout, and it would have been impossible to do anything with them." The officers admitted the force of his argument and said, "These are higher tactics than we should have been capable of." Translator. This story has already been told in brief in Chapter 4, where Li Chuan uses it to illustrate Han Xin's uncommon skill as a general.
When a force has fallen into danger, it can snatch victory from defeat.
Mei Yao Chern. Until it has fallen into danger, its will is not sufficiently concentrated. Translator. Giles has another characteristically Edwardian comment here. Danger has a bracing effect.
Success in war lies in scrutinizing enemy intentions and going with them.
Cao Cao. If he shows an inclination to advance, lay an ambush for him and retreat. If he seems anxious to retreat, then set out and attack him. Jiang Yu, Giles. If the enemy shows an inclination to advance, lure him on to do so. If he seems anxious to retreat, delay so that he can do so. Translator. Another interpretation reads this as, "and in feigning to go along with them."
Focus on the enemy, and from hundreds of miles you can kill their general. This is success through cunning. On the day you decide to attack, close the passes, destroy the tallies.
Giles. The special kind used at city gates and on the frontier, tablets of bamboo or wood, one half of which was issued as a permit or passport by the official in charge of a gate. When this half was returned to him within a fixed period, he was authorized to open the gate and let the traveler through.
Break off intercourse with envoys. Be firm in the temple council for the execution of your plans.
Translator. See Chapter 1.
If the enemy opens a door, rush in. Seize what he holds dear, and secretly contrive an encounter.
Chern Hao. If we manage to seize a favorable position, but the enemy does not come, the advantage cannot be exploited. He who wishes to take a position that the enemy holds dear must begin by contriving a secret encounter with the enemy and inveigle him into going there. Mei Yao Chern. This subtly contrived encounter is achieved through the enemy's own spies, who will carry back certain information. We must then succeed in arriving before the enemy, even though we may have set off after him. We must set off after him in order to ensure that he arrives. We must arrive first in order to seize what he holds dear.
Discard rules.
Cao Cao. As defined by rule and compass. Jia Lin. Victory is all that matters, and this cannot be achieved by following set rules. Giles. Napoleon, as we know, according to the veterans of the old school whom he defeated, won his battles by violating every accepted canon of warfare. Translator. As all previous translators concur, this passage is hopelessly corrupt. I have followed Jia Lin's emendation.
Follow the enemy to fight the decisive battle.
Du Mu. Fall in with the enemy's disposition, and when the dynamic of the situation offers a favorable opportunity, come out for the decisive battle.
At first, be like a maiden.
Amiot. Before the campaign begins, be like a young girl who never leaves the house. She looks after the household, she takes care to prepare everything, she sees everything, hears everything, knows everything, but to outward appearance she is utterly uninvolved.
When the enemy opens the door, be swift as a hare.
When the campaign has begun, you must react as swiftly as a hare, who, finding himself pursued by hunters, strives by 1,000 twists and turns to find his way back to the refuge of his dwelling.
Your enemy will not withstand you.
Chapter 12. Attack by Fire.
Master Sun said, "There are 5 ways to attack by fire. The first is to burn men."
He Yan Shi, Giles, History of the Later Han. Ban Chao was sent on a mission to the king of Shanshan. See previous chapter where the first part of the story is used to illustrate obedience in the face of extreme danger. Relations between the Chinese government and these border states in the far west were often difficult. Ban found himself placed in great peril by the unexpected arrival of an envoy from the Xiongnu barbarians, the mortal enemies of the Chinese. In consultation with his officers, he exclaimed, "Nothing ventured, nothing gained." Literally, unless you enter the tiger's lair, you cannot seize the tiger's cubs. The only course open to us now is to make an assault by fire on the barbarians under cover of night, when they will not be able to discern our numbers. Profiting by their panic, we shall exterminate them completely. This will dampen the king's courage and shower us in glory, besides ensuring the success of our mission. The officers all replied that it would be necessary to discuss the matter first with the intendant. Ban Chao then fell into a passion. "It is today," he cried, "that our fortunes must be decided. The intendant is only a run-of-the-mill civilian, who on hearing of our project will certainly be afraid and will bring everything out into the open. An inglorious death is no worthy fate for valiant warriors." All then agreed to do as he wished. Accordingly, as soon as night came on, he and his little band quickly made their way to the barbarian camp. A strong gale was blowing at the time. Ban Chao ordered 10 of the party to take drums and hide behind the enemy's barracks, it being arranged that when they saw flames shoot up, they should begin drumming and yelling with all their might. The rest of his men, armed with bows and crossbows, he posted in ambuscade at the gate of the camp. He then set fire to the place from the windward side, whereupon a deafening noise of drums and shouting arose to the front and rear of the Xiongnu, who rushed out pell-mell in frantic disorder. Ban Chao slew 3 of them with his own hand, while his companions cut off the heads of the envoy and 30 of his suite. The remainder, more than 100 in all, perished in the flames. The following day Ban Chao sent for Guang, the king of Shanshan, and showed him the head of the envoy. The whole kingdom was seized with fear and trembling, which Ban Chao took steps to allay by issuing a public proclamation. Then, taking the king's son as a hostage, he returned to make his report.
The second is to burn supplies.
Du Mu, Giles, History of the Sui Dynasty. This refers to all kinds of grain and fodder. In order to subdue the rebellious population of southern China, Gao Geng recommended to Emperor Weng of the Sui dynasty, reigned AD 589 to 605, to make periodic raids and burn their supplies of grain, a policy that in the long run proved entirely successful.
The third is to burn equipment.
Du Mu, Giles. An example of this is the destruction of Yuan Shao's wagons and impedimenta by Sun-Tzu in AD 200.
The fourth is to burn warehouses. The fifth is to burn lines of communication.
Translator. The commentators have widely diverging theories as to the meaning of this last target. I follow Niu and Wang, page 142, and take it to refer to the various means of communication, roads, bridges, boats, mountain passages, that enable an army to keep itself informed and supplied.
Attack by fire requires means. The material must be ready.
Jialin. It requires wind and dry weather. Du Mu. We need dry plant matter, reeds, brushwood, straw, grease, oil, etc.
There is a season for making a fire. There are days for lighting a flame.
Mei Yao Chern. A fire should never be started recklessly.
The proper season is when the weather is hot and dry.
Jiang Yu. Because the fire will catch more easily. Translator. This is one of those not altogether rare occasions when the Chinese commentator seems to be stating the obvious.
The proper days are when the moon is in Sagittarius, Pegasus, Crater, Corvus. These are the four constellations of rising wind.
Translator. These are Giles' approximations, and Father Amiot more or less agrees. Like several other early Jesuits in China, Amiot was a formidable astronomer. In Chinese, these four constellations are called the basket, the wall, the wings, and the chariot.
When attacking with fire, adapt to these 5 changes of fire. If fire breaks out within the enemy camp, respond at once from without.
Cao. Respond by sending troops. Li Chuan. Respond by exploiting the dynamic potential of the outbreak of fire. Du Yo. Use spies to start a fire within the enemy camp and then attack at once from without. Du Mu. The prime object of fire is to throw the enemy into confusion and then to attack. Fire is not in itself the means for defeating the enemy, so attack as soon as you hear of the outbreak of fire. Once the fire has died down and order is re-established, an attack will be futile.
If fire breaks out, but the enemy remains calm, wait. Do not attack.
Du Mu. If the effect of creating confusion is not produced, it means that the enemy is ready for us. A precipitate attack must be avoided. Wait for the ensuing changes.
Let the fire reach its height and follow up if at all possible. If not, wait.
Li Chuan. If the fire has not thrown the enemy into confusion, do not attack. Translator. I follow Niu and Wang, pages 144 to 45, in taking these last 2 sections together.
If fire attack is possible from without, do not wait for fire to be started within. Light when the time is right.
Du Mu, Jiang Yu, Giles, History of the Later Han. The previous passages refer to fires being started within, but if the enemy is settled in a waste place littered with quantities of grass, or if he has pitched his camp in a position that can be burned out, we must carry our fire against him at any seasonable opportunity, and not wait on in hopes of an outbreak occurring within, for fear our opponents should themselves burn up the surrounding vegetation, and thus render our own attempts fruitless. The famous Li Ling, flourished 99 BC, once baffled the leader of the Xiongnu barbarians in this way. The latter, taking advantage of a favorable wind, tried to set fire to the Chinese general's camp, but found that every scrap of combustible vegetation in the neighborhood had already been burned down. On the other hand, Bo Tsai, a general of the Yellow Turban rebels, was badly defeated in AD 184 through his neglect of this simple precaution. At the head of a large army, he was besieging Changxi, which was held by Huang Fu-sung. The garrison was very small, and a feeling of nervousness pervaded the ranks. So Huang Fu-sung called his officers together and said, "In war, there are various indirect methods of attack, and numbers do not count for everything. See Master Sun, Chapter 5. Now the rebels have pitched their camp in the midst of thick grass, which will easily burn when the wind blows. If we set fire to it at night, they will be thrown into a panic, and we can make a sortie and attack them on all sides at once, thus emulating the achievement of Tian Dan. See the commentary to Master Sun, Chapter 9. That same evening, a strong breeze sprang up. So Huang Fu-sung instructed his soldiers to bind reeds together into torches and mount guard on the city walls, after which he sent out a band of daring men who stealthily made their way through the lines and started the fire with loud shouts and yells. Simultaneously, a glare of light shot up from the city walls, and Huang Fu-sung, sounding his drums, led a charge which threw the rebels into confusion and put them to headlong flight.
When starting a fire, be upwind. Never attack from downwind. A wind that rises during the day lasts long. A night wind soon fails. In war, know these 5 changes of fire and be vigilant.
Zhang Yu. It is not enough to know how we should attack the enemy with fire. We must also be on guard against the enemy's fire attacks on us. Keep a close eye on the positions of the stars, know the days when the wind will rise, and be prepared. Translator. The ever-helpful Messrs. Niu and Wang recapitulate for us as follows. The ways in which the warrior should be responsive to the 5 changes of fire are: 1. By responding at once when a fire breaks out within the enemy camp. 2. By being cautious when a fire breaks out within but the enemy remains calm. 3. By lighting a fire from without if the time is right. 4. By always starting a fire upwind. 5. By not relying on a night wind.
Fire assists an attack mightily. Water assists an attack powerfully.
Zhang Yu. Water can divide enemy troops. With the enemy's potential divided, our own potential is stronger.
Water can isolate, but it cannot take away.
Cao Cao. Fire can help to win victory. Water can only isolate and divide. It cannot deprive the enemy of his stores. Zhang Yu. Water can only isolate an army, cut off its van from its rear, and bring a temporary victory. It cannot destroy the enemy's supplies and utterly annihilate him as fire can. Han Xin used water to flood Luangzhu, see Chapter 9, and thereby achieved a temporary victory. But when Cao Cao destroyed Yuan Shao's baggage train by fire in AD 200, Yuan Shao was not only defeated, he was utterly annihilated.
To win victory, to complete an objective, but not to follow through, is a disastrous waste.
Mei Yao Chern. If one wishes to be sure of victory, one must seize the right moment and act using means such as fire and water. One should never sit tight and hold on to existing gain. This is disastrous. Translator. Giles comments that this is one of the most perplexing passages in the art of war. My own translation is, I am afraid, no more than a rather wordy paraphrase based on Mei Yao Chern's commentary, which in this instance differs from the others. With Niu and Wang, I take the passage to be referring to the need to follow through on an attack by fire.
Hence the saying, the enlightened ruler considers deeply, the effective general follows through.
Zhang Yu. The ruler must consider and ponder strategy. The general must follow through with victory.
Never move except for gain.
Li Chuan. The enlightened ruler and the effective general will not send troops into battle unless they can see a definite gain.
Never deploy except for victory. Never fight except in a crisis.
Sun-Tzu. Fight only as a last resort.
A ruler must never mobilize his men out of anger. A general must never engage battle out of spite.
Yu. A war arising out of anger usually leads to defeat.
Move if there is gain. Halt if there is no gain.
Sun-Tzu, Yu. Do not embark on war out of personal emotion. Look to the objective gain or loss. As Master Wei Liao said, do not make war out of anger. If you see victory, fight. If you do not, then hold back.
Anger can turn to pleasure. Spite can turn to joy.
Yu. The senses bring pleasure, the mind experiences joy.
But a nation destroyed cannot be put back together again. A dead man cannot be brought back to life.
Mei Yao Chern. The anger of a moment can turn to pleasure soon enough. The spite of a moment can soon turn to joy. But if you destroy a nation and take the lives of many men, these cannot be brought back so easily.
So the enlightened ruler is prudent. The effective general is cautious. This is the way to keep a nation at peace and an army intact.
Translator. Niu and Wang go to great lengths to maintain a connection between the last part of this chapter and the title Attack by Fire. But it seems to me that, as is often the case, this short chapter is not an organic whole. These last few observations, which are surely of a general nature, may have been tacked on here by mistake by a copyist working with unconnected bamboo or wooden slips. Yates, 1985, page 219. As D.C. Lau warns us, page 322, with texts such as this, we must guard against forcing a unified sense out of what does not, in fact, belong together. Chapter 13. Espionage. Yu. In order to have a true knowledge of the enemy, spies are indispensable, and the art of spying requires the utmost secrecy. Translator. As the 13th century Shiite wazir Nasir al-Din al-Tusi wrote, "The most effective weapon with which to fight an enemy is knowledge of his projects and intentions. To achieve this, every scrap of information must be collected together concerning the decision-making process." Quoted by Shalian, page 444.
Master Sun said, "Raising an army of 100,000 men and marching them 300 miles drains the pockets of the common people and the public treasury to the daily sum of 1,000 taels of silver. It causes commotion at home and abroad, and sets countless men tramping the highways exhausted."
The Way in Its Power, Chapter 30. Where troops have been quartered, brambles and thorns spring up. Mei Yao Chern. They are exhausted by the need to transport supplies.
It keeps 700,000 families from their work.
Sun-Tzu. Of old, 8 families made up a neighborhood. If one family sent a man to the war, the other 7 families had to support them. So when 100,000 troops were mobilized, 700,000 families were thereby prevented from tending their crops properly. Du Mu. In olden times, land was divided into 9 parts, as in the Chinese character for a well, Jing, which resembles exactly the grid for the game of noughts and crosses, or tic-tac-toe. Each of these 9 parts was approximately 15 acres in extent. The central plot was held in common, and here the well was dug, and the cottages were built where the 8 families who farmed the 8 surrounding parcels of land lived. Mei Yao Chun. There will be a shortage of men at the plow.
Two armies may confront each other for several years for a single, decisive battle. It is callous to begrudge the expense of 100 taels of silver for knowledge of the enemy's situation.
Wang Shi. This refers to the cost of employing spies. Translator. Giles' note here succeeds excellently in spelling out Master Sun's thinking. Quote, "The argument is certainly ingenious. Master Sun begins by drawing our attention to the frightful misery and vast expenditure of blood and treasure which war always brings in its train. Now, unless you are kept informed of the enemy's condition and are ready to strike at the right moment, a war may drag on for years. The only way to get this information is to employ spies, and it is impossible to obtain trustworthy spies unless they are properly paid for their services. But it is surely false economy to grudge a comparatively trifling amount for this purpose, when every day that the war lasts eats up an incalculably greater sum. This grievous burden falls on the shoulders of the poor, and hence Master Sun concludes that to neglect the use of spies is nothing less than a crime against humanity." End quote.
Such a miser is no commander of men, no support to his lord, no master of victory.
Translator. Giles' comment, though not of strict relevance or even necessarily true, is challenging and of considerable intrinsic interest. Quote, "This idea that the true object of war is peace has its root in the national temperament of the Chinese. Even so far back as 597 BC, these memorable words were uttered by Prince Zhuang of the Chu state. The character, that is word in the Chinese script, for military prowess is made up of the graphic elements to stay and a spear, cessation of hostilities. Military prowess is seen in the repression of cruelty, the calling in of weapons, the preservation of the appointment of heaven, the firm establishment of merit, the bestowal of happiness on the people, putting harmony between the princes, the diffusion of wealth." End quote. The Zor Commentary, 12:3.
Prior information.
Li Chuan, through the use of spies.
Enables wise rulers and worthy generals to move and conquer, brings them success beyond that of the multitude. This information cannot be obtained from spirits. It cannot be deduced by analogy.
Cao Cao. This cannot be obtained by prayer, nor can it be obtained by deductive reasoning.
It cannot be calculated by measurement.
Li Chuan. Properties such as length and distance can be calculated and measured. Not so enemy dispositions. Translator. The Duke of Wellington, 1769 to 1852, remarked, "All the business of war, and indeed all the business of life, is to endeavor to find out what you don't know by what you do. That's what I call guessing what was at the other side of the hill." Croker Papers, 1885.
It can be obtained only from men, from those who know the enemy's dispositions.
Mei Yao Chun. Information about spirits can be sought through divination. Information about natural phenomena can be acquired through deductive reasoning. Knowledge of the principles of the natural universe can be gained through measurement and calculation. But military intelligence can be obtained only through the use of spies.
There are 5 sorts of spies: local, internal, double, dead, and live. When these 5 sorts of espionage are in operation, no one knows the way of it. It is called the mysterious skein, the Lord's treasure.
Du Mu. When spies operate, no one knows how the information is divulged. It is a mystery, a treasure. Mei Yao Chern, it is a mysterious skein of threads to be prized by the ruler. Translator. Giles quotes again from what seems to have been one of his favorite books, Baden-Powell's Aids to Scouting. Cromwell, one of the greatest and most practical of all cavalry leaders, had officers styled scoutmasters, whose business it was to collect all possible information regarding the enemy through scouts and spies, etc., and much of his success in war was traceable to the previous knowledge of the enemy's moves thus gained.
Local spies come from among our enemy's fellow countrymen.
Du mu. Treat the people of the enemy country kindly and use them as spies.
Internal spies from among our enemy's officials.
Du mu, Giles. Such officials include worthy men who have been degraded from office, criminals who have undergone punishment. Also, favorite concubines who are greedy for gold, men who are aggrieved at being in subordinate positions or who have been passed over in the distribution of posts. Others who are anxious that their side should be defeated in order that they may have a chance of displaying their ability and talents. Fickle turncoats who always want to have a foot in each camp. Officials of these several kinds should be secretly approached and bound to one's interests by means of rich presents. In this way, you will be able to find out the state of affairs in the enemy's country, ascertain the plans that are being formed against you, and moreover disturb the harmony and create a breach between the sovereign and his ministers. He Yanxi, Giles. In A.D. 303, Luo Sheng, governor of Yizhou, sent his general Wei Bo to attack the rebel Li Xiang of Shu in his stronghold at Pi. After each side had experienced a number of victories and defeats, Li Xiang had recourse to the services of a certain Pu Tai, a native of Wudu. He began by having him whipped until the blood came, and then sent him off to Luo Sheng, whom he was to delude by offering to cooperate with him from inside the city, agreeing to light a beacon at the right moment for making a general assault. Luo Sheng, trusting these, his internal spies' promises, marched out all his best troops, placing Wei Bo and others at their head, with orders to attack at Pu Tai's bidding. Meanwhile, the rebel Li Xiang's general had prepared an ambuscade on the line of march. Pu Tai raised long scaling ladders against the city walls and now lighted the beacon fire. Wei Bo's men raced up on seeing the signal and began climbing the ladders as fast as they could, while others were drawn up on ropes lowered from above. More than 100 of Liu Sheng's soldiers entered the city in this way, every one of whom was forthwith beheaded. Li Xiang then charged with all his forces, both inside and outside the city, and routed the enemy completely. This is presumably given as an example of setting up an internal spy to achieve one's own end, and illustrates, as Giles points out, the need for extreme caution in dealing with internal spies. It seems rather curious that he, Yanxi, should offer it as his prime example, even though he himself ends with the significant sentence, "This is an example of the potential effect of internal spies."
Double spies from among our enemy's own spies.
Du Yo, Giles. We use generous bribes and liberal promises to win over the enemy's spies to our service.
Dead spies are those for whom we deliberately create false information. They then pass it on to the enemy.
Translator, the ultimate deception. Du Mu, Giles. We ostentatiously do things calculated to deceive our own spies, who must be led to believe that the intelligence has been unwittingly disclosed. Then, when these spies are captured in the enemy's lines, they will make an entirely false report, and the enemy will take measures accordingly, only to find that we do something quite different. The spies will thereupon be put to death. Jiang Yu. An example of the dead spy was Li Yiqi, who was sent in 203 BC by the king of Han to open peaceful negotiations with Qi. The king of Qi, being subsequently attacked without warning by Han Xin and infuriated by what he considered the treachery of Li Yiqi, ordered the unfortunate envoy to be boiled alive.
Live spies are those who return with information.
Du Mu, Giles. They move to and fro between the enemy camp and ours. Such live spies must be men of keen intellect, though in outward appearance fools, of shabby exterior, but with a will of iron. They must be active, robust, endowed with physical strength and courage, thoroughly accustomed to all sorts of dirty work, able to endure hunger and cold, and to put up with shame and ignominy.
In the whole army, none should be closer to the commander than his spies, none more highly rewarded, none more confidentially treated.
Du Mu. Spies must be treated on a mouth-to-ear basis. That is, no one else must share in the communication. Translator. Giles quotes yet again from Turenne, who, as he says, made perhaps larger use of spies than any previous commander. Spies are attached to those who give them most. He who pays them ill is never served. They should never be known to anybody, nor should they know one another. When they propose anything very material, secure their persons, or have in your possession their wives and children as hostages for their fidelity. Never communicate anything to them but what is absolutely necessary that they should know.
Without wisdom, it is impossible to employ spies.
Mei Yao Chern, Giles. In order to use them, one must know fact from falsehood and be able to discriminate between honesty and double-dealing.
Without humanity and justice, it is impossible to employ spies.
Translator. Could anyone call the treatment accorded to dead spies either humane or just? Jiang Yu. Treat them with generosity and trust. When once they have been attracted by generous pay, deal with them honestly, and they will work for you to their utmost.
Without subtlety and ingenuity, it is impossible to ascertain the truth of their reports.
Mei Yao Chern, Giles. Be on your guard against the possibility of spies going over to the service of the enemy.
Subtlety of subtleties. Spies have innumerable uses.
Mei Yao Chern. There is nothing they cannot discover.
If confidential information is prematurely divulged, both spy and recipient must be put to death.
Chern Hao. To punish the spy and to close the other man's mouth and thus prevent the enemy from acquiring the information.
In striking an army, in attacking a city, in killing an individual, it is necessary to know beforehand the names of the general and of his attendants, his aides, his doorkeepers, his bodyguards. Our spies must be instructed to discover all of these in detail. Enemy spies come to spy on us, must be sought out, bribed, won over, well accommodated. Then they can be employed as double agents. From the double agent we discover local and internal spies.
Jiang Yu, Giles. We must tempt the double agent into our service because it is he that knows which of the local inhabitants are greedy of gain and which of the officials are open to corruption.
From the double agent we learn how best to convey misinformation to the enemy.
Jiang Yu, Giles. Because the double agent knows how the enemy can best be deceived.
From the double agent we know how and when to use live spies. The ruler must know all 5 of these sorts of spies. This knowledge must come from the double agent, so the double agent must be treated generously. Of old, the rise of the Yin dynasty was due to Yi Ji, who had served under the Xie.
Translator. Li Zhi was a minister under Cheng Teng, first emperor of the Yin or Shang dynasty, circa 1600 to circa 1076 BC, which replaced the Xia dynasty, circa 2000 to circa 1600 BC. He helped to overthrow the infamous last tyrant of Xia, Ji Gui.
And the rise of the Zhao dynasty was due to Liu Ya, who had served under the Yin.
Translator. Liu Ya, also known as Liu Shang, is the ancient duke occasionally referred to by the commentators and supposedly himself author of a famous treatise on war entitled The Six Quivers. He served under the last tyrant of the Yin Shang dynasty, Zhou Xin, and later helped to overthrow him and found the Zhou dynasty, circa 1027 to 221 BC. As Giles comments, we can hardly doubt that Master Sun is holding these two up as illustrious examples of the double agent or something closely analogous. Mei Yao Chern, for one, however, appears to resent any such aspersion on these historic names.
Only the enlightened ruler, the worthy general, can use the highest intelligence for spying, thereby achieving great success.
Du Mu, Giles. Just as water, which carries a boat from bank to bank, may also be the means of sinking it, so reliance on spies, while productive of great results, is often the cause of utter destruction.
Spies are a key element in warfare. On them depends an army's every move.
Jialin, Giles. An army without spies is like a man without ears or eyes.
This concludes the reading of The Art of War, the essential translation of the classic Book of Life by Sun-Tzu, translated by John Minford. Copyright 2002 by John Minford. This book was read by Lorna Raver and Ray Porter. This unabridged recording was published by arrangement with Penguin Putnam Incorporated and was produced in 2008 by Blackstone Audio Incorporated, which holds the copyright. Neither this recording nor any portion of it may be reproduced or used for any purpose without prior written authorization from Blackstone Audio Incorporated. If you would like to obtain a complete catalog of our titles or our monthly update telling you about new releases and our new collection of books on CD and MP3 CD, call 1-800-SAY-BOOK. That's 1-800-729-2665. You may also obtain the same information from our award-winning website. Our address, all one word, is www.blackstoneaudio.com. Thank you.